Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to look at something really exciting, and it's a technique that I think most people don't know about and don't know how to use. It's called negative painting. So we're going to take a look at a quick example, and then we're going to apply it to this painting of a goldfinch. So the first way we're going to look at it is if you just painted it normally, like if you painted the interior of this feather, for example, before painting the outside of it. So you're using a light color, filling it in, you're trying to hit all the spots, but you notice I have to go through and I have to fix little mistakes, like the edge I didn't paint all the way up to. I'm matching color, so there's an issue there. And then when I go to add a background to it, well, I started out with too much water, so it's bleeding into it. It's not a consistent tone or color, and I'm having all kinds of mistakes that I'm trying to fix on the fly, rather than having a consistent picture. And so in the second example, we're going to use negative painting, so I can do something that I couldn't do before, which is just paint over with a general wash. I can use other techniques like wet and wet, so I can add in different colors and make things blend well together, and in a way that I couldn't do the first time because I was focused on filling in the feather before everything dried. And this way I can take advantage of some of those other techniques to make a more cohesive picture. So then I'm going in with a darker color from the outside, and that's how I'm actually making the shape of the feather. You can see I'm drawing in the dark color from the outside in, and that's what's creating this sort of shadow on the feather, the darker areas, the spots where there's little lines in the feather. And I can decide that on the fly. I don't have to sort of sketch that beforehand and draw according to that. So using a negative painting technique allows you to sort of address and adjust how you're painting on the fly and make a more cohesive picture than if you did it the other way. So let's move on to painting the goldfinch. And I'm going to do a lot of the same things that I did with the feather, just with a subject in mind. So I'm actually just starting with a wash. I have my sketch in place, obviously, but I'm starting with a yellow wash over the whole bird. I'm not trying to paint the details in right away, and I'm only just getting a base layer down. I'm going back with a little bit of more saturated color where I know it's going to end up being darker, so where those feathers start to overlap. But in general, I'm just starting with a wash. In the same way with these darker areas, the back of the wings that are just dark black or dark brown, I'm just putting a general light coat on first. And I know I'll come back in later and add some more detail with negative painting. The beak is a little bit different, it's pretty standard. So that's the other thing about this. You don't have to only do negative painting. You can do a little bit of both. You don't have to always do one or the other. Sometimes the technique will make more sense than other times. But in this case, a lot of the feathers, a lot of the texture that I'm adding, like right here, is by negative painting. So I'm painting in the shadow rather than adding the lights part first. So it oftentimes makes most sense when you're painting something that's light against something that's dark. You can use those shadows to add the texture to your painting rather than trying to be super precise with the light paint that you're doing. Another issue that you're going to have here if you're doing it the normal way is that, say you paint something light, you're going to go back over it, and suddenly as soon as you paint a darker layer on it, you're going to destroy all of the detail that you added in the first place. So painting it in a negative way lets you add some of that detail afterwards without worrying about saving it or saving the highlights. You can paint the details afterwards, and you know that you're not going to have to go back over it necessarily. And so you don't only have to use really dark colors to do that negative painting. An example here is that I'm using just a more saturated yellow on the front of the bird there to define some of those shadows. And so the more saturated color is what would be the shadow in this case. The very front of the bird is in pretty bright light, so it's not going to be very saturated. It's going to be somewhat more of a pale, closer to a white color. And so I'm using the more saturated yellow to paint those quote-unquote shadows, the darker areas of the bird. It doesn't have to be with black. And so now you see I'm going back through here. I had left some highlights where the bird transitioned from the yellow feathers to the black feathers, and I'm using that black or really dark blue paint to paint the shadows of that transition. And you can use these really scratchy strokes. So make sure your brush isn't too wet, but you can use really scratchy strokes to add this texture in. So you're not necessarily using a bunch of water and painting a big wash across. You're using a more dry brush technique, and that's allowing you to create some of the texture, these really fine shadows and fine details that are really going to create this illusion of a complicated subject, which can sometimes be really hard to do with watercolors. So painting with a dry brush allows you to add these details, really fine details, without sort of destroying or washing over the whole piece at once. You'll notice I'm also using that negative painting technique up with the eye. That's sort of how I'm defining these really, really small feathers around the eye of the bird, is with the negative painting technique. And it's something you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. You wouldn't be able to do it the other way, is what I mean. You wouldn't be able to paint the light feathers. You'd have to paint the dark feathers to create those shadows in the first place. And so as you're going, you're just adding more and more layers. Here I'm adding just more of the saturated yellow colors, more of the dark black or blue colors onto the bird, and I'm adding in layers. I'm letting things dry in between so that when I go back and add these details, it's really crisp. What I don't want is for the painting to be wet and for all the paint that I'm adding to smear around. So I'm waiting for everything to be dry so that when I go back in, it's making really crisp, clean lines on the bird. I hope that was helpful, and if you enjoyed the content, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe, tell a friend about me, try it for yourself. I've got some other videos you can check out, and until next time, have a good day.